The Galactic Science Council was the pinnacle of intellectual achievement for over 12,000 years. Comprised of the brightest minds from 1,000 different species, their word was law when it came to matters of scientific discovery. Their current project, the most ambitious in a century, was the Xenopsychology Endurance Project. The goal was simple: to map the physical and mental limits of the galaxy's sentient species. For this, they had built the Crucible. It was a station of pristine white metal and gleaming observation decks orbiting a dead star. At its heart was a series of environmental chambers, capable of simulating any world, any disaster, any form of psychological or physical stress imaginable. They had tested the stoic, crystalline graph, who could survive the vacuum of space for an hour. They had tested the fluid-based xylos, who could reform their bodies after being crushed. They had tested the telepathic avianri, whose minds could shatter a lesser being's will. All had their limits, and all those limits had been meticulously documented, quantified, and filed away. Now, the Council had turned its attention to a new, unremarkable species from a small, blue planet, humans. The lead researcher was a Zorblax named High Examiner Velix. Velix was a towering, insectoid creature with 4 multifaceted eyes and a carapace that shimmered with intellectual pride. He found the humans to be disappointing. They had no natural weapons, no psychic abilities, no ability to survive in extreme environments without their primitive technology. They were soft, pink, and fragile. The only reason they were even being tested was because of their persistent, annoying habit of showing up everywhere. They were like a stubborn weed. They are so breakable. Velix clicked to his assistant, a small, furry creature named Flix. Look at this one. Minimal muscle density, no dermal armor, a laughably narrow range of atmospheric tolerance. Flix, who was in charge of the life support logs, nodded nervously. Yes, High Examiner. But their application to the program was enthusiastic. Enthusiasm is not endurance, Velix scoffed. He looked at the file of the selected human specimen. Adam Kincaid. Age, 34. Occupation, former emergency responder. Hobby, marathon running. It sounded so primitive. Let us begin. We will start with a standard isolation and sensory deprivation protocol. It usually breaks the weaker species within a week. Adam Kincaid had been on the station for 3 days. He was a man of medium height with a face tanned by a sun the aliens had never seen, and eyes that crinkled at the corners from a lifetime of smiling. He was currently sitting in a featureless white room, talking to a grate in the ceiling. You know, on Earth, we call this a timeout, he said, his voice echoing slightly. Usually, you have to be bad to get one. I'm pretty sure I was on my best behavior. On the observation deck, Velix's translation device converted the sounds into his own language. He speaks to himself. A sign of mental deterioration already? Actually, sir, Flix interjected, tapping his console. His vitals are remarkably stable. Heart rate, 62 beats per minute. Brainwave patterns show a mix of alpha and beta waves, indicating a calm but alert state. He shows no signs of stress. Velix's antennae twitched. Impossible. Increase the sensory deprivation. Full darkness, total silence, negative pressure to eliminate any tactile sensation. The lights in Adam's room died. The gentle hum of the air circulation vanished. He couldn't even feel the floor beneath him. For a moment, there was absolute nothing. Then, in the silent darkness, the observers heard a faint sound. Humming. Adam was humming a tune. It was off-key and simple, but it was a rhythm, a melody he created from within himself. He was making his own reality because the external one had been taken away. For 2 weeks, they tried. They deprived him of sleep using sonic pulses that would keep any other test subject awake, screaming, until they collapsed. Adam would simply enter a state of microsleep, his body snatching seconds of rest whenever the pattern of the pulses allowed, a skill he'd learned during 36-hour shifts as a paramedic. They bombarded him with disorienting strobe lights and infrasound. He closed his eyes and started counting prime numbers in his head to stay focused. They plunged the room into freezing temperatures. He did push-ups. They raised the temperature to sweltering levels. He sat in a corner and meditated, his body slick with sweat, his mind calm and detached. The council observers were baffled. Charts and graphs that had perfectly predicted the breaking points of a dozen other species were useless. Human endurance wasn't a line. It was a constantly shifting, adapting, stubborn plateau. His pain tolerance is off the charts. One researcher, A mollusk-like creature with eye stalks exclaimed. We applied a low-grade neural stimulator that would have caused crippling discomfort to a graph. He just yawned. Low grade. Velix snapped. Increase it to level 7. That's the threshold for permanent nerve damage in the Xylos. They watched as Adam's body tensed. His knuckles, gripping his knees, turned white. A low groan escaped his lips. But then, he started to breathe. Deep, rhythmic breaths. In through the nose, out through the mouth. He focused on a spot on the wall he couldn't see. He built a fortress in his mind, brick by brick. Each brick a memory, the smell of rain on hot asphalt, the feel of his dog's fur. The face of his wife, the monitors showed his pain receptors screaming. But his conscious mind had built a dam against the flood. He's compartmentalizing, Flix whispered in awe. He's acknowledging the pain, but refusing to let it control his actions. Velix was growing agitated. This was not science. This was an anomaly. An insult to their methodology. Enough of the physical. It's clear their physiology has unusual adaptive characteristics. We move to Phase 2, psychological deterioration. Phase 2 was the domain of the avian representative, a graceful, bird-like creature named Kavark, whose feathers were the color of twilight. They were masters of the mind, and their task was to break it. They didn't use crude telepathy. Instead, they used targeted neurochemical induction. They flooded Adam's chamber with aerosols designed to trigger primal fears. The first was fear of falling. Adam felt a sudden, vertiginous lurch. He felt as if the floor had dropped away, and he was tumbling into an infinite abyss. He gasped, his hands scrabbling for purchase on the smooth floor. For a moment, panic flared in his eyes. The observers leaned forward. But then, he closed his eyes and spoke to himself. It's not real. It's just a feeling. You are on the floor, Adam. You are safe. He rode out the wave of terror, and it passed. Next, Kavark induced a primal fear of being hunted. Adam's heart began to pound as an overwhelming sense of being watched, of a predator just behind him, flooded his senses. Every shadow in the dark room seemed to move. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He could almost hear the breathing. He felt the urge to run, to hide, to scream. Instead, he stood up. He turned in a slow circle, facing the darkness. Come on then, he said, his voice a low, steady challenge. If you're there, show yourself. His defiance, a warrior's response to a prey animal's fear, shattered the induced sensation. Kavark was becoming frantic. Nothing is working. Try the fear of isolation, the fear of the unknown, the fear of failure. They threw every psychological weapon they had at him. They made him feel utterly alone in the universe, a speck of dust in an infinite, uncaring void. They showed him visions of his own mortality, his body decaying, his memories fading to nothing. They showed him his loved ones dying, their faces twisted in pain, blaming him for not being there. This last one hit him hard. Adam slumped to his knees. A single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The image of his wife, Sarah, looking at him with betrayal, was a knife in his gut. The fear of letting down the people he loved, of failing in his duty to them, was the most real, most potent weapon they had used, but he didn't break. He grieved. He allowed himself to feel the sorrow, to acknowledge the pain of the vision. He held it in his mind, not as a reality, but as a possibility. And in doing so, he found its antidote, love. He remembered the real Sarah, her laugh, the way she'd hold his hand. The trust in her eyes when he left for work every day. He replaced the fabricated image with the real memory, and the fear dissolved. He stood up, wiped his face, and said to the unseen observers, "You're getting better." That one almost felt real. On the observation deck, the mood was one of stunned, horrified silence. Kavark was trembling, their feathers ruffled and dull. "This is not possible," they whispered. "No mind can withstand that. No mind can face its own existential terror and its deepest personal fears and simply get back up." Velix was silent for a long time, his 4 eyes fixed on the human. For the first time in his centuries-long career, he was facing a variable he could not calculate. He was looking at a creature that seemed to define itself by its refusal to break. He made a decision. A reckless, unscientific, desperate decision. "Initiate Phase 3, he commanded. Flix gasped. "High Examiner, Phase 3 is a theoretical simulation only. It has never been run on a living subject. The Council forbids. The Council is not here." Velix thundered. And this human has made a mockery of our life's work. Phase 3 is not about testing a subject's endurance against a single, defined stressor. It is about endurance against everything, simultaneously, the complete, chaotic collapse of reality. If he has a limit, we will find it.